DiJonai Carrington, had every reason to know what was coming when she walked into the rematch. Against Indiana, for 2 weeks, the August 23rd matchup had been hanging over the WNBA. Like a countdown clock, it started with a hard foul, an ejection, a social media post that exploded across basketball, and then a mysterious August 23rd message that fans immediately connected to. The next meeting with the Fever. Suddenly, this wasn't just another regular season game. It was the game everyone wanted to see. Would Carrington answer Indiana on the court? Would Sophie Cunningham be involved again? Would Caitlin Clark become part of the confrontation? Nobody knew exactly how it would unfold. But there was one thing nobody expected. By the end of the night, the entire revenge narrative had flipped upside down. Carrington's Chicago Sky were eliminated from playoff contention. Indiana had won by 23 points, and Clark had just produced one of the most ridiculous shooting performances of her career. 37 points, 10 assists, 8 three-pointers, and somehow, the player everyone expected to be at the center of the revenge story became a supporting character in Caitlin Clark's latest headline game. But the real story didn't begin on August 23rd. It began 15 days earlier, when one play changed everything. On August 8th, Indiana and Chicago were already playing a tense game at the United Center. Then, during the first quarter, Sophie Cunningham broke away toward the basket. Carrington came from behind and made contact with Cunningham around the head and neck area. Cunningham still completed the play, but the contact immediately turned the atmosphere ugly. She got back to her feet and confronted Carrington before teammates intervened. Officials reviewed the play and upgraded the foul to a flagrant 2, ejecting Carrington from the game. The refereeing decision itself was significant because a flagrant 2 means officials judged the contact to be both unnecessary and excessive. Chicago ultimately lost the game 90-86, but the final score almost became an afterthought. The foul was the story. Then Carrington made sure the story wouldn't disappear when she left the arena. Shortly after the ejection, she posted the words, "white privilege," on social media and tagged the Indiana Fever. Within minutes, the conversation moved beyond the game. People were arguing over what the post meant, whether it was directed at the ejection, whether it referred to Cunningham, or whether Carrington was making a broader point. And that uncertainty became part of the controversy itself. Cunningham wasn't buying the interpretation. After the game, she said she didn't believe race had anything to do with the call and pointed out that she had previously been ejected herself. Carrington, meanwhile, later pushed back against the assumption that her post was specifically describing the foul as white privilege. That distinction matters, because the internet had already decided what the post meant be. DiJonai Carrington had been waiting for August 23rd. At least, that's how it looked to fans. After the heated August 8th matchup with Indiana, after the foul on Sophie Cunningham, after the ejection, and after the social media controversy that followed, the next Fever Sky meeting suddenly felt like something much bigger than a regular season game. Then Carrington posted August 23rd. Fans immediately connected the date to the rematch. And just like that, the countdown began. Everybody wanted to know the same thing. Would Carrington actually get her revenge? Would she finally have her moment against Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever? Well, the answer came on the court, and it was probably the exact opposite of what most people expected. Instead of Carrington owning the night, Caitlin Clark exploded for 37 points, 10 assists, and a career-high 8 three-pointers. Indiana won 113-90. Chicago's playoff hopes disappeared, and the player who had been at the center of the build-up suddenly wasn't the biggest story anymore. Because this wasn't Carrington's night, it was Caitlin Clark's. And the story behind how we got there is even crazier. Everything started on August 8th. Indiana and Chicago were already playing a physical game when Sophie Cunningham broke toward the basket. Carrington chased the play from behind and made contact with Cunningham around the head and neck area. Cunningham went down, the officials reviewed the play, and Carrington was hit with a flagrant 2 and ejected. That moment immediately changed the atmosphere. The game itself was still going, but the conversation had already moved somewhere else. Was the foul intentional? Was it simply an aggressive defensive play that went too far? Was the punishment fair? And then Carrington made the situation even bigger. After leaving the game, she posted "white privilege" on social media while tagging the Fever. That single post sent the controversy flying. Fans interpreted it in different ways, and the debate quickly became much bigger than basketball. Cunningham later pushed back against the idea that race had anything to do with the ejection, while Carrington later clarified that people had made assumptions about what her post meant. That distinction matters, because once social media decides what a post means, explaining it afterward doesn't necessarily stop the controversy. And the story didn't disappear. It followed Carrington into the next meeting. Then came the mysterious August 23rd post. Maybe Carrington intended it as a revenge game message. Maybe she meant something broader. Nobody outside her circle could know for sure, but fans had already made up their minds. August 23rd became the date everyone circled. The rematch. The sequel. The game where Carrington could finally answer Indiana on the court. And that created a massive problem. Because once you turn a regular season game into a revenge story, the game itself gets to decide whether the story was re. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Because a rivalry like this doesn't disappear after one game. If anything, a 23-point blowout makes the next meeting even more anticipated. Carrington now has something different to deal with. Not just the original controversy, not just the social media attention, but the memory of what happened when the two teams finally met again. And Caitlin Clark has something too. Momentum, the kind that can change an entire season. Before August 23rd, the conversation was about whether Clark could handle the physical pressure Chicago was expected to bring. After August 23rd, the conversation became whether anybody could actually slow her down when she gets into that kind of rhythm. That's a completely different question, because Clark didn't just score 37 points. She controlled the game. She created for teammates. She stretched the defense. She forced Chicago to constantly make decisions. And every bad decision seemed to turn into another Indiana opportunity. That's what makes the Fever dangerous heading toward the postseason. You can prepare for one player. Preparing for an entire offense is much harder. And Kelsey Mitchell is a huge part of that equation. 30 points against Chicago wasn't just a nice supporting performance. It meant the Sky couldn't load everything onto Clark. Every time Chicago tried to focus on one scorer, the other one became dangerous. That's the kind of problem coaches hate, because there isn't an obvious solution. But Chicago's biggest problem may not even have been defensive. It was what happened when Indiana started pulling away. The Sky needed somebody to stop the bleeding. They needed a run. They needed a player to completely change the energy. Instead, Indiana kept adding pressure. The fourth quarter became a statement. 30 points from Indiana, 13 from Chicago, and suddenly the game was over. That's when the rivalry became secondary. Because Chicago wasn't just losing a heated matchup. They were losing their postseason opportunity. The Sky had spent the